Marty Jannetty was never supposed to be just a sidekick. For a lot of fans who grew up watching wrestling in the late 80s and early 90s, he was one of the most exciting guys in the ring. He was quick, athletic, and fun to watch. But the truth is, Marty's story has never been about just what he did in the ring. It's about what happened outside of it. His personal life, his choices, and his struggles with drugs and alcohol kept dragging him down. Every time it looked like he was about to break through, something went wrong. And today, we will explore all that from the start. Marty Jannetty was born Frederick Martin Jannetty in Columbus, Georgia in 1960. Growing up, he was like a lot of kids in the South: sports, school, and finding ways to stay busy. He wasn't born into wrestling like some guys, but he had that natural athletic ability. He wrestled and played football in high school, and people around him knew he had the kind of energy that stood out. After high school, Marty didn't go straight into wrestling. He actually went to the University of West Georgia, where he wrestled on the amateur team. He wasn't just a guy messing around either. He was good. That background gave him the kind of stamina and toughness that would help him later when he made the jump into professional wrestling. Like a lot of wrestlers from that era, Marty started small, bouncing around regional promotions and learning the craft. He trained under Jerry Oates, who was respected in the Georgia wrestling scene. It wasn't glamorous work. He was driving long hours, wrestling in small venues, and taking every chance he could get. But he had the determination. And that determination landed him places. Within a few years, he became a good part of a tag team, the Rockers. The Rockers started in the mid-1980s. Marty and Shawn Michaels were first known as the Midnight Rockers in the AWA, a smaller promotion compared to WWF. The two of them clicked right away. They had chemistry in the ring and looked like they belonged together. Fans loved the way they wrestled because it was faster and more exciting than a lot of what they were seeing at the time. Marty and Shawn won the AWA tag team titles twice, and even though it wasn't the biggest stage, people noticed. Marty even got a shot at the NWA World Championship. He didn't win, but that match showed that promoters saw him as more than just a tag guy. He could hang with the top singles wrestlers too. When Vince McMahon came calling in 1987 and brought them to WWF, it seemed like this was it, the big break. But almost as soon as they got there, it fell apart. The Rockers were fired after only a few weeks. The official reason was partying too hard. The lifestyle was catching up to them. They were out all the time, drinking, doing drugs, and getting into trouble. Shawn Michaels later admitted that if they wrestled 300 nights a year, they partied 290 of them. Marty himself has said it wasn't just casual drinking. They were doing all kinds of drugs. For WWF, it was too much, too soon. And just like that, they were gone. That first firing was a sign of things to come. Marty's whole career would be filled with moments where he was right on the edge of something big, but personal issues knocked him back down. Still in wrestling, talent always gets another chance. And in 1988, Vince McMahon gave the Rockers one more shot. This time, they delivered. The fans loved them. They had incredible matches against some of the top teams of that era. The Hart Foundation, Demolition, the Brain Busters. The Rockers never officially won the WWF Tag Team titles, though there was one night they actually did win them. But the match was never aired because the ring ropes broke and the company decided not to recognize the title change. Even without the belts, the Rockers were stars. Every kid wanted to be like them. For a while, it seemed like Marty had put the wild lifestyle behind him. He was on TV every week. He was in one of the most popular teams in the company, and his future looked bright. But like everything else in wrestling, it couldn't last forever. By the early 90s, Shawn Michaels wanted to break out on his own. The team had been together for years, and Shawn was already thinking about becoming a solo star. Behind the scenes, there were reports of real tension between him and Marty. So the company made the call to split the Rockers. And they did it in one of the most famous ways possible. In January 1992, the Rockers appeared on Brutus the Barber Beefcake's talk show, The Barber Shop. On camera, they teased that maybe the team was having problems, but they shook hands and hugged. It looked like everything was going to be fine. Fans watching at home probably felt relieved. And then, in a split second, Shawn Michaels super kicked Marty in the face. The crowd gasped, but Shawn wasn't done. He grabbed Marty and threw him headfirst through a glass window. That moment was shocking. People still talk about it today. It was called the kick heard around the world. For Shawn Michaels, it was the beginning of a whole new chapter. For Marty, it should have been the start of his big solo run too. He was supposed to feud with Shawn and maybe even have a huge WrestleMania match against him. It was all lined up, but almost immediately it fell apart. Just weeks after the barbershop segment, Marty was arrested in Tampa, Florida. The charges included cocaine possession and resisting arrest. Instead of building on the momentum of one of the most famous storylines ever, he was suspended and released. The feud with Shawn had to be scrapped. Another chance, gone. This became the pattern of his life. The company would bring him back, and he'd show flashes of brilliance. In 1993, he even beat Shawn Michaels on an episode of Raw to win the Intercontinental Championship. For a moment, fans thought, okay, this is it. Marty's finally breaking through. But not long after, he was gone again. The reason? More personal problems. In 1995, he was brought back as part of a new version of the Rockers, teaming with Leif Cassidy, who would later be known as Al Snow. But the magic was gone. The new Rockers never clicked, and Marty was gone again within a year. The company cited personal issues yet again. Fast forward to 2005. Marty reunited with Shawn Michaels on Raw, and the fans went wild. For one night, it was like old times. WWE even offered him a new contract. But once again, things fell apart almost instantly. A domestic incident ended the deal, and he was off TV again. In 2006, they tried one more time, but a court order kept him from traveling. That was the end of his WWE career. By then, Marty's reputation was set. He was the guy who couldn't hold it together. Even though he kept getting chances, he never made them last. By the late 90s, he was working in WCW, but only as enhancement talent. From being one of the hottest stars in the business to basically being a guy used to put others over. It was a steep fall. And then came the incident that shocked everyone. In August 2020, Marty posted something on Facebook that left fans stunned. He wrote about something he claimed happened when he was just 13 years old. According to him, a man tried to sexually assault him behind a bowling alley. Marty said he fought back, hit the man with a brick, and then dragged his body to a river. He ended the post by saying, "That was the first time I made a man disappear." People didn't know what to think. Was he serious? Was he making a joke? Was it some strange attempt at a wrestling storyline? The post sounded like a murder confession, and the police in Columbus, Georgia, took it seriously. They actually opened an investigation and looked into old missing persons cases to see if it matched anything. That's how serious it was. Later, Marty tried to walk it back. He said it was all part of a wrestling storyline, that people misunderstood what he meant. But the damage was done. The post was all over the internet, and fans couldn't believe what they had just read. Even if it wasn't true, it made Marty look unstable, and it added another dark chapter to his already complicated story. That Facebook post wasn't an isolated thing either. Over the years, Marty's social media has been filled with strange, confusing, and sometimes disturbing posts. Some were funny, some were just bizarre, and some were deeply worrying. Without a filter, the world was seeing Marty raw and unedited, and it painted a picture of a man who wasn't doing well. Today, when wrestling fans talk about Marty Jannetty, it's often through the term that his career inspired, the Jannetty. In wrestling slang, the Jannetty means the weaker half of a tag team, the one who doesn't go on to become a star. Every time a tag team breaks up, fans joke about who's going to be the Shawn and who's going to be the Jannetty. That's how much his career has shaped the way people look at tag teams. But that label doesn't tell the full story. Marty wasn't just some guy riding Shawn's coattails. He was genuinely great in the ring. He was one of the most innovative performers of his time. He helped make tag team wrestling faster, more exciting, and more athletic. His problem was never ability. It was always what happened outside the ring. If you compare his story to Shawn Michaels, it feels even more tragic. Shawn had his own issues: pills, alcohol, a reputation for being hard to work with. For a long time, people thought he was on the same path as Marty, but Shawn turned it around. He found faith, got sober, came back, and built one of the greatest second acts in wrestling history. Marty never had that turnaround. His demons stayed with him, and they kept him from ever reaching the level he should have. At 65, Marty is still out there. He does appearances, he still connects with fans, and he survived when a lot of wrestlers from his era haven't. But his story isn't about championships or classic matches anymore. It's about a guy who had all the tools, who got chance after chance, and who never managed to hold on to them. When you look back at Marty Jannetty's life, it's both inspiring and sad. Inspiring because of how good he was at his peak, and sad because of how much he lost along the way. He should be remembered as one of the best tag team wrestlers of his generation. Instead, he's remembered as the cautionary tale, the warning of what can happen when you don't take control of your life. Marty Jannetty had everything you'd want in a wrestler: the look, the skills, the charisma. But his story proves that talent isn't enough. You have to be able to handle the pressure, the lifestyle, and the choices that come with it. He never could. And that's why, instead of being talked about in the same breath as Shawn Michaels, he's remembered as the man who couldn't escape his own demons. Still, when fans look back, they don't just see the mistakes. They remember the rockers flying around the ring, the matches that felt ahead of their time, and the moments that made them jump out of their seats. They remember the good right alongside the bad. Today, Marty's story feels like both a warning and a reminder. A warning about how fast it can all slip away when the lifestyle gets the better of you, and a reminder of just how much fun he brought to the business when he was at his best. He'll never be Shawn Michaels. He'll never be the one who made it to the very top, but he'll always be remembered, and not just as a punchline. Because at the end of the day, Marty Jannetty was real, flawed, chaotic, talented, and unforgettable. And in wrestling, that's a legacy all its own. If you enjoyed this story and want more deep dives into wrestling's wildest lives, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment about your favorite Marty Jannetty memory. If you grew up during the golden age of wrestling, you know Jimmy Hart. His energy was infectious, and his presence was unforgettable. That's what makes the story of his life today, at 81 years old, so difficult to hear. But tragedy hits even the best of us. Let's see who he really is and what went wrong. Jimmy was born James Ray Hart on New Year's Day in 1944. He grew up around music, and it stuck with him. By the time he got to high school at Treadwell, he already had the performance bug. In 1963, he and some friends started a band. They called themselves the Gentrys, 7 guys, just kids at the time, playing at school dances and parties. Then everything changed. In 1965, they recorded a song called Keep On Dancing, and it blew up. The song hit the top 5 on the Billboard charts and sold over 1 million copies. Suddenly, these teenagers from Memphis were on tour with the Beach Boys and Sonny and Cher. They were even on TV shows like Shindig and Hullabaloo. For a moment, they were living the dream. But success is tricky. The Gentrys never matched that first big hit. They had a couple of other songs, but nothing close. Eventually, the band fell apart. Jimmy didn't quit, though. In 1969, he put together a new version of the Gentrys, this time with himself as the lead singer. He kept the name alive, played clubs around Memphis, and stayed on stage. What he didn't know was that all this, singing, performing, working a crowd, was preparing him for something completely different. Wrestling. The way Jimmy got into wrestling wasn't planned. It happened because of an old friend. Jerry the King Lawler had gone to the same high school as Jimmy. By the late 1970s, Lawler was the biggest star in Memphis wrestling, but he was stuck. His longtime manager had died, and he didn't know who could fill that role. He thought about Jimmy. Lawler knew Jimmy had charisma. He knew he could talk. He knew he could get a reaction. So he asked Jimmy to try it, and it worked right away. Jimmy Hart, the musician, became Jimmy Hart, the wrestling manager. He started off managing Lawler when Jerry was playing the villain, and Jimmy fit right in. But the big turning point came later. Lawler got hurt in a football game. He was out for real, not just for the story. On TV, Jimmy turned on him. He said Lawler was a liability. He walked away. That betrayal changed everything. Jimmy started a group called The First Family. He brought in wrestler after wrestler, all with one goal: to take out Jerry Lawler and win his title. And these weren't just random guys. He had King Kong Bundy, Rick Rude, Randy Savage, Eddie Gilbert, the Iron Sheik, Jim the Anvil, Neidhart, and even a young Hulk Hogan. Memphis fans watched every week to see who Lawler would have to fight next. The reason it worked so well was simple. People in Memphis knew that Jimmy and Jerry were actually friends in real life. So when Jimmy betrayed him, it felt real. It felt personal. That's why the fans hated Jimmy so much. He and Jerry trusted each other enough to take that real friendship and turn it into a bitter feud on screen. And the fans couldn't get enough of it. Jimmy became the guy everyone loved to hate. By the early 1980s, Jimmy Hart was already hated in Memphis wrestling. He had the megaphone. He had the mouth. The fans couldn't stand him. But then something happened that made everything even bigger. Andy Kaufman showed up. Andy wasn't a wrestler. He wasn't even really a comedian. He called himself a performance artist. He liked to confuse people. Sometimes he made them laugh. Sometimes he made them mad. Sometimes he just made them scratch their heads. That was his whole deal. One of his strangest acts was the intergender wrestling champion idea. He would stand in a ring and challenge women from the crowd. If any woman could pin him, he would pay her money. But he didn't stop there. He insulted them. He told them they were weak. He called them names. He made sure the crowd hated him. That was the point. Andy wanted to take this act to a bigger stage. He went to the WWF and tried to pitch it. Vince McMahon Sr. turned him down. Vince didn't want Hollywood actors mixed up in his shows. So Andy had to look somewhere else. That's when wrestling journalist Bill Apter stepped in. Apter thought Andy would be perfect for Memphis. Memphis wrestling was wild and built around stories that felt real. He introduced Andy to Jerry Lawler. It worked right away. Andy leaned into being the arrogant Hollywood guy. He told the fans they were dumb. He mocked their accents. He even made tapes where he taught them how to wash with soap. He acted like he was better than everybody, and the Memphis crowd hated him more than anyone they had ever seen. But there was still a problem. Not everyone understood Andy Kaufman. He was weird. His humor didn't make sense to a lot of people. That's why putting him with Jimmy Hart was so smart. Jimmy was already the top villain in Memphis. Everybody knew him. Everybody hated him. So when Andy stood next to Jimmy, the crowd didn't have to think about it. They didn't need to figure Andy out. They just looked at Jimmy and thought, if he's with Jimmy Hart, then he's bad too. It was that simple. Jimmy grounded Andy. He made Andy's crazy act fit inside the world of wrestling. Together, they were perfect. They teamed up in matches against Lawler. Andy even offered money to anyone who could hurt Lawler. With Jimmy by his side, Andy had real heat. The fans were furious. Then came the moment that changed everything. July 28, 1982. Jerry Lawler and Andy Kaufman appeared on Late Night with David Letterman. The show started normal. They sat down for an interview. Andy was cocky as always. Lawler sat there looking annoyed. But the tension grew. Andy pushed harder. He mocked Lawler. He teased him. And then it happened. Lawler stood up. He slapped Andy hard across the face. So hard Andy fell out of his chair and onto the floor. The audience gasped. Letterman looked stunned. He quickly called for a commercial break. When the show came back, Andy exploded. He screamed at Lawler. He cursed him out on live TV. He threw coffee on him. He ranted until he was chased off the set. Nobody watching at home knew it was staged. It looked completely real. The next day, the whole country was talking about it. Newspapers covered it. TV shows replayed it. Even the New York Times put it on the front page. For a wrestling feud in Memphis, that was unheard of. Suddenly, the world cared about Jerry Lawler, Andy Kaufman, and yes, Jimmy Hart too. What made it so powerful was the commitment. Kaufman never broke character. Lawler never admitted it was planned. Even David Letterman didn't know everything that was going to happen. His real confusion made the whole thing feel even more real. It blurred the line between reality and performance in a way no one had ever seen before. And Jimmy Hart was right there in the middle of it. He didn't throw the slap, he didn't flip the table, but he played his role perfectly. He stood next to Andy, yelling into his megaphone, making sure the fans understood this was part of his war with Lawler. He tied it all together. Without Jimmy, it might have just been a weird Hollywood stunt. With Jimmy, it felt like Memphis wrestling at its best. The impact was massive. A young Vince McMahon Jr. saw what happened. He saw how much attention this feud got. He saw how it brought wrestling into pop culture in a way nothing else had before. And he learned from it. A few years later, Vince built the Rock and Wrestling Connection. He brought in Cyndi Lauper. He brought in Mr. T. He used celebrities to make wrestling bigger than ever. That led straight to WrestleMania. And it was the Kaufman and Lawler feud in Memphis that showed him it could work. Looking back now, the whole thing feels almost legendary. You had Andy Kaufman, this strange genius who wanted to mess with reality. You had Jerry Lawler, the perfect hometown hero who stood up for Memphis. And you had Jimmy Hart, the villain who made sure the crowd stayed angry and loud every single week. These controversies are too small. The real reason Jimmy Hart is sad at 81 is the tragic passing of his brother, his best friend, Hulk Hogan. For more than 40 years, Jimmy and Hulk were side by side. They weren't just co-workers in the wrestling business. They weren't just a manager and a wrestler. They were family. They traveled together. They worked together. They laughed together. They grew old together. Jimmy always said that Hulk was like his brother. Then in July of 2025, Hulk Hogan died suddenly of cardiac arrest. For Jimmy, it was the hardest moment of his life. The loss came out of nowhere. Just the night before, Jimmy had called Hogan's home. He wanted to check on his friend. One of Hulk's assistants answered the phone. Jimmy asked how Hulk was doing. The reply came back cheerful. "He's doing great." Jimmy hung up the phone feeling happy, feeling relieved. He thought his friend was safe. But the very next morning, the news came. Hulk was gone. Jimmy was crushed. His first words to reporters were broken. He said, "Just overnight, it all happened, but it was so positive the day before. I'm just so devastated right now. I still can't believe it's true." The first thing he did was call Jerry Lawler. Jerry was another one of Jimmy's oldest friends. Jerry had known Hogan too. When Jerry picked up, Jimmy was already crying. He could barely get the words out. It was raw and real. Jimmy often says that wrestling is like a fraternity. It is a brotherhood. He calls it a tight-knit group. Wrestlers spend years together on the road. They see each other every day. They share food. They share hotels. They share highs and lows. The friendships last a lifetime, but the losses cut deep. When Jimmy talked about Hulk's passing, he tried to find comfort. He pictured Hulk in heaven with all the others who had gone before him. Jimmy said, "He's going to be with Andre the Giant. He's going to be with the Wild Samoans, Sika and Afa. He's going to be with Dusty Rhodes, who was his mentor. He's going to be with Randy Savage, who he and Hulk, they were so tight back in the day." For Jimmy, this thought helped. He imagined Hulk laughing with Randy again. He imagined him standing tall with Andre. He imagined a family reunion in the afterlife. But the comfort never lasted long. The pain always came back, because the truth was simple. Hulk wasn't here anymore, and Hulk wasn't the only one. Jimmy has lost many friends over the years. From his first family in Memphis, so many names are gone. King Kong Bundy, Rick Rude, Eddie Gilbert, Jim the Anvil Neidhart. The list goes on and on. Each name carries a memory. Each memory carries sadness. Every time Jimmy thinks about it, he feels the weight of being one of the last ones left. But Hulk's death was different. Hulk wasn't just another wrestler. Hulk was the closest. Hulk was his partner through everything. When Jimmy left Memphis and went to WWF, Hulk was there. When Jimmy switched to WCW years later, Hulk was there too. They stuck together no matter what. When Hulk was in the spotlight, Jimmy was right beside him with the megaphone. When Hulk faced criticism, Jimmy defended him. When Hulk celebrated victories, Jimmy cheered louder than anyone. That is why the loss cut so deep. It wasn't just about losing a friend, it was about losing his other half. Jimmy always said that no matter where he went, Hulk was part of the journey. They rode in cars together late at night after shows. They ate at small diners at 3 in the morning. They talked about family. They talked about dreams. They shared things that never made it to the cameras. Those were the real moments. Those were the moments Jimmy now misses the most. At 81, Jimmy has lived a long life. He has had ups and downs. He has been cheered. He has been booed. He has been on top and he has struggled. But none of that hurt him like this. This is the deepest sadness he has ever felt. For Jimmy Hart, the loud jackets and the megaphone are part of the story. But the real story is the bond he shared with Hulk Hogan. And now every day without Hulk feels a little emptier. From the outside, people talk about controversies, they talk about matches, they talk about fame, but Jimmy doesn't care about that anymore. The only thing that matters to him is the hole left by the loss of his brother, his friend, his Hulkster. And that is why Jimmy Hart, at 81, is still grieving. Jimmy Hart's story is bigger than just one chapter of his life. His legacy runs through music, wrestling, and pop culture itself. He wasn't just a manager with a megaphone. He was a creator, a hype man, a storyteller, and someone who helped shape some of the most memorable moments in wrestling history. Think about it. From his early days in Memphis with Jerry Lawler to bringing in stars like Randy Savage and a young Hulk Hogan, Jimmy always had an eye for talent. He knew how to make people care. He knew how to get a reaction. He turned boos into money and rivalries into legends. When the spotlight moved to the WWF in the 1980s, Jimmy was right there. His jackets, his voice, his larger-than-life personality made him impossible to ignore. He didn't just stand on the sidelines. He made every match feel bigger, every wrestler feel more important. From the Hart Foundation to the Honky Tonk Man to the Hulkster himself, Jimmy had a hand in some of wrestling's greatest runs. Even in WCW, when wrestling was at its most competitive, Jimmy was still there, still working, still part of history. Wherever wrestling went, Jimmy followed, always adding color, always adding energy, always making sure the show never slowed down. That's what makes his legacy so strong. He wasn't the biggest guy in the ring. He didn't throw punches or win titles, but he made you believe. He made you feel something every single time he picked up that megaphone. And now when fans look back on decades of wrestling, Jimmy Hart is always part of the picture. He's the soundtrack, the spark, the man who could make you cheer or make you boo louder than you ever thought possible. That's what lasts. That's the legacy. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next video. What's your favorite Jimmy Hart memory? Drop it in the comments and let's talk about it. This is the story of the Mouth of the South, Jimmy Hart. Loud, colorful, unforgettable. A true legend of wrestling. At 69, Tommy Rich's life is honestly heartbreaking. It's tough to watch a guy who was once such a big star now battling personal demons. Years of substance abuse have really taken a toll, leaving him in a rough and miserable place. Let's dive in and see what exactly caught up with him over the years. Like so many wrestlers from that wild era, Tommy Rich's career didn't just slow down because of age or bad luck. It was deeply affected by personal battles he was fighting behind the scenes. Over the years, stories have come out from fellow wrestlers, promoters, and people who worked closely with him, and they all paint a similar picture of a man who was struggling with some heavy demons. Pills were a big part of it, and that constant fight with substance abuse seemed to follow him everywhere he went. What makes it even sadder is that this wasn't just a random bad habit. In the wrestling world of the late 70s and early 80s, painkillers and other drugs were almost a part of the job. The schedule was brutal, with wrestlers driving hundreds of miles a night, working through injuries, and rarely getting a chance to rest. For someone like Rich, who was thrown into the spotlight so young and rose to fame so quickly, the temptation and the pressure were almost impossible to escape. These habits started to catch up with him, and you could see it in his career. The same guy who once felt unstoppable in the early 1980s, who captured that magical lightning-in-a-bottle moment when he shocked the wrestling world, began to lose that spark. The energy, the consistency, the big-time performances that made him a household name started to fade. It wasn't that he lost his talent, it was that the personal demons he carried made it nearly impossible to keep that fire burning. Many wrestling insiders believe these struggles were one of the key reasons why Rich couldn't hold on to the momentum he built during his peak. Now let's take a look at the side of Tommy Rich we all wish we could have seen for much longer. The energetic, powerful version of him that made fans fall in love in the first place. This was the Tommy who lit up every arena, the one whose fire and charisma made him unforgettable. If those personal issues hadn't gotten in the way, who knows how far that incredible spark could have taken him. Rich first broke into wrestling in 1974, learning the ropes in the Tennessee regional promotions after training under the legendary Jerry Jarrett. Back then, wrestling wasn't about glitz, pyrotechnics, or social media fame. It was about long drives between small towns, gritty arenas filled with cigarette smoke, and fans who believed every punch, every slam, and every feud. And Tommy Rich fit right in. He was hungry, energetic, and willing to take whatever bumps he had to in order to climb the ladder. Through the late 1970s and into the 1980s, Rich became a familiar face in the National Wrestling Alliance territories of Tennessee, Georgia, and Alabama. These were the heartlands of old-school wrestling, where the crowds were loud, the rivalries were real to the fans, and the performers gave everything they had night after night. Rich quickly made his mark, capturing dozens of NWA regional titles and becoming a favorite in every arena he stepped into. But what really set him apart was his connection with the fans. Whether he was battling a villainous heel or cutting an emotional promo, Rich had a way of making people feel like they were right there with him, living every moment. By the early 80s, Tommy Rich wasn't just a regional star. He was one of the faces of wrestling on television. He became one of the original stars of the TBS wrestling shows, which were exploding in popularity during the late 70s and early 80s. If you turned on TBS back then, chances are you'd catch Tommy bleeding and brawling with some of the toughest names in the business. His feuds were the stuff of legend. Fans still talk about his bloody battles with Mad Dog Buzz Sawyer, Ole Anderson, Ivan Koloff, and the Fabulous Freebirds. These weren't just matches. They were wars that had people on the edge of their seats. Every time Rich stepped in the ring, it felt like something wild could happen, and that unpredictable energy made him one of the most beloved wrestlers of the era. Then came the moment that truly cemented his place in wrestling history. On April 27, 1981, in Augusta, Georgia, Tommy Rich shocked the wrestling world by defeating Harley Race to win the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. It was a dream come true and a sign that Rich had arrived at the absolute top, but the celebration was short-lived. Just 4 days later, Rich lost the belt back to Race in Gainesville. Behind the scenes, it turned out the title change was part of a bigger political struggle in the Georgia territory. Promoter Jim Barnett, who was also a minority owner and the booker of the NWA title, reportedly used the excitement and boosted ticket sales from Rich's win to secure his position in the company. Even though Rich's reign was brief, that victory made history and showed the wrestling world that he could hang with the very best. Of course, championships were only part of Tommy Rich's story. Some of his most memorable moments came from his long-running rivalries, none more famous than his feud with Mad Dog Buzz Sawyer. Their battles over the NWA Georgia national title went on for nearly 2 years and became some of the most talked about matches in wrestling at the time. The rivalry reached its unforgettable climax in 1983 with the Last Battle of Atlanta, a brutal, fully enclosed cage match that was billed as a last man standing war. For years, fans thought no footage of this historic match existed, making it almost mythical. But in 2016, the WWE Network finally released the full video, giving newer fans a chance to witness the chaos and intensity that defined that showdown. After that war, Rich and Sawyer even tried teaming up for a short time to take on the new powerhouse duo known as the Road Warriors, but the alliance didn't last. Rich soon found himself feuding with Ted DiBiase in another storyline that kept fans hooked. In one of the more creative angles of the era, Rich lost a loser leaves wrestling match, which forced him to leave the territory. But instead of disappearing, he returned under a mask as a mysterious character named Mr. R. DiBiase was convinced it was really Rich under the mask, and in a clever twist, Rich appeared at the announcer's desk during a match while rookie wrestler Brad Armstrong wrestled in the Mr. R disguise. With everyone distracted, Armstrong pinned DiBiase to win the NWA national title, leaving DiBiase furious and the fans thrilled. From there, Rich headed back to Memphis, where he teamed with Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert to form a new version of Fargo's Fabulous Ones, after the original duo of Steve Kieran and Stan Lane left the territory. Together, Rich and Gilbert won the AWA Southern Tag Team titles in 1984, proving that Rich was still a top draw. But wrestling friendships rarely stay peaceful for long. After losing the titles, Gilbert turned on Rich in a dramatic and bloody television segment. What started as an award presentation for Tag Team of the Year turned into chaos when Gilbert, thinking Rich wasn't around, began insulting his former partner. Rich stormed out, and the two ended up in a violent confrontation that left Gilbert bloodied. In a shocking twist, Gilbert later pretended to apologize, only to betray Rich again by smashing his head into the ring post. It was classic Memphis storytelling, raw, emotional, and unforgettable. Even as the years went on, Tommy Rich kept finding ways to stay relevant. He worked in Southeast Championship Wrestling before returning to Memphis in 1987, where he played a key role in one of the greatest feuds in wrestling history, Austin Idol versus Jerry Lawler. This rivalry lasted over a year and featured some of the most dramatic moments Memphis wrestling had ever seen. In one legendary night, Rich hid under the ring for the entire show, waiting to interfere in a high-stakes cage match between Idol and Lawler. His surprise attack helped Idol win, leading to Lawler's humiliating head shaving and sparking one of the most shocking heel turns of Rich's career. After that, Rich eventually made his way to the AWA, where he turned face once again and found himself in feuds with Adrian Adonis. By 1989, Tommy Rich found himself back in familiar territory when he returned to the Georgia scene, now rebranded as World Championship Wrestling after Ted Turner purchased the company. WCW was trying to freshen things up with a mix of new talent and proven veterans, and Rich was brought in as one of the recognizable faces fans still loved. Eddie Gilbert reintroduced him on TV, and Rich immediately set his sights on U.S. champion Lex Luger. He picked up early wins, even teaming with family members Johnny and Davey Rich. But the momentum didn't last. With rising stars like Brian Pillman and the Great Muta, and established names like Ricky Steamboat and Terry Funk grabbing the spotlight, Rich was soon bumped down the card. Despite the slide, Rich kept fighting. He challenged Luger in house show matches, teamed with Gilbert, and even scored TV victories over talents like Cactus Jack and Bam Bam Bigelow. By 1990, he was in better shape and slowly climbing back, teaming with Tim Horner and Ricky Morton, even scoring a pay-per-view win over the Midnight Express. He ended the year stronger than he started, proving he still had plenty of fire. In 1991, Rich joined Morton and Junkyard Dog to win the WCW six-man tag team titles, a brief high point before another drop. He eventually turned heel and became Thomas Rich in the York Foundation, but the gimmick didn't save his spot. By 1992, he left WCW and worked the independent circuit, later popping up in USWA, Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and even ECW, where he led the Full-Blooded Italians. After ECW closed, Rich kept busy on the indie scene, wrestling at small shows, signing autographs, and teaming with old friends like Ricky Morton. Decades later, he still makes appearances, proving his love for wrestling never really faded. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss more classic wrestling stories like this one. Robert Gibbs-Soon was the heart of one of wrestling's most iconic teams, the quiet, reliable partner who loved to flash moves. But what happens when the music stops and the arenas empty out? Robert is almost 68, and his life has been a wild ride of fame, hard knocks, and quiet battles you never saw. This is his story and where he is now. To understand Robert's life, we need to go back to the 1980s when wrestling was changing fast. The old territory system was fading, wrestling was coming on TV all across the country, and wrestlers were turning into big stars. It was loud, colorful, and exciting, and right in the middle of it all came the Rock and Roll Express. Now, the Rock and Roll Express wasn't just another tag team. Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson looked and acted like rock stars. They had long hair, bandanas, flashy clothes, and wrestled in a fast style people weren't used to back then. Ricky often got more attention because he was usually the one getting beaten up before making the big comeback. But Robert was just as important. He was the calm and steady partner who held the team together. There was something extremely charming about him. But Robert's life wasn't always easy. He was born Reuben Kane on July 19, 1958. Fans saw him as strong and reliable, but outside the ring, life was harder. Like many wrestlers of that time, he faced struggles and temptations. His career wasn't just about fame, it was about surviving and finding ways to keep moving forward, no matter what. Now, back in the 80s and 90s, wrestling looked like nothing but fun from the outside. Big crowds, wild characters, non-stop action. But for the wrestlers themselves, it was tough. The travel never stopped. They were driving all night, catching a few hours of sleep in cheap hotels, then getting up and doing it all again the next day. On top of that, they were always hurt. Every match left bruises or worse, and there was never enough time to heal. So what did a lot of guys do? They turned to drugs, painkillers to fight through injuries, stimulants to stay awake on long road trips, other things just to get a break from the stress. For most of them, it wasn't about partying, it was about survival. But that survival plan came with a heavy cost. Once you started relying on pills or powders just to make it through the day, it was almost impossible to stop. Robert was right in the middle of all that. He wasn't the only one. Almost everyone from his generation went through it. Gibson never told long, detailed stories about his own struggles, but people in the business knew. It was just part of the life wrestlers were living back then. The truth is, there wasn't much help. No support system, no one stepping in to say, slow down. The rule was simple. Don't show weakness. If you're hurt, tape it up. If you're exhausted, take something and keep moving. If you admit you're struggling, you might lose your spot. That mindset drove a lot of people deeper into addiction. The fact that he kept it private doesn't make it any less real. A lot of wrestlers stayed silent about their problems back then. The business didn't make it safe, to be honest. So the battles played out in private until they started showing up in broken health, broken families, or careers cut short. For Gibson, like so many others, the toughest fights weren't in the ring. They were on the road, in hotel rooms, and inside himself. Years later, in 2007, Gibson found himself in a different role. He was working as an assistant trainer in Ohio Valley Wrestling, WWE's developmental territory. It should have been a good fit, passing his knowledge down to the next generation, but things fell apart after a backstage argument that spun out of control. CM Punk was around at the time. He was already ECW champion, but also came to OVW to help with talent. Punk always wore the straight-edge X's on his taped wrist to show what he stood for. Gibson didn't like it. He told Tony Atlas, another veteran working there, to straighten out the young guys, and especially the one with the tape. Atlas went up to Punk, thinking he was just a trainee, and told him the tape made him look like his arms were broken. Punk refused to take it off. Later that night, during a meeting, Atlas called him out in front of everyone and even called him an asshole. Punk fired back, saying Atlas didn't understand the current product, that his advice was out of touch, and that he couldn't even remember people's names. The argument went on for nearly 20 minutes. Atlas eventually admitted he'd been wrong, and that Gibson had pushed him into it. He even apologized to Punk. But it was too late. Gibson got blamed for starting the whole thing, and he was fired from his job in OVW. That fight was never really about wrist tape. It was about two different worlds colliding. Old school veterans like Gibson and Atlas believed in one way of doing things. Punk represented a new style in a new era. When those two approaches clashed, it ended badly for Gibson. Sadly, this wasn't the end of controversies for Robert. When Gibson and Morton teamed up, it was magic. Fans connected with them right away. They were fast, exciting, and always fighting from underneath. People loved to cheer for them. Together, they built one of the greatest tag team legacies in wrestling. But behind the scenes, their partnership was just as real as it looked. And like family, it wasn't always smooth. Morton has said their relationship was like a marriage. They were together all the time, wrestling, traveling, sharing cars and hotel rooms, and just like a married couple, they fought. Sometimes over little things, sometimes over bigger things. He laughed about how they'd fight like cats and dogs. But there was one line they never crossed. They never hit each other, never threatened each other. The respect was too strong. That respect ran deep. At the WWE Hall of Fame, Morton looked at Gibson and said, "I love him just like he's my own brother. I've been with him more than my own brothers." That wasn't just a nice line for the cameras. It was true. They had been through everything together. The highs of sold-out arenas, the lows of being underpaid and overworked. Through it all, they stayed side by side. But money caused real problems. Wrestling in the 80s wasn't easy on a wrestler's wallet. Pay was often unclear, and promoters weren't always honest. In 1988, Gibson had enough. He got into a pay dispute with Jim Crockett Promotions and walked out. Some stories even say he was so mad he broke something in the promoter's office. Whether that part's true or not, it shows how tense things were. For wrestlers, money wasn't just about comfort, it was survival. Their story got even messier on screen. In 1990, Gibson badly injured his knee during a match with Doom. Butch Reed came down on his leg and tore his ACL. While Gibson was out recovering, WCW made a shocking move. They turned Ricky Morton against him. In 1991, Morton joined the York Foundation, He even started going by Richard Morton. Suddenly, the Rock and Roll Express were on opposite sides. At the Great American Bash, Morton pinned Gibson in the ring. It was just part of the storyline, but fans felt the betrayal. Wrestling has a way of mixing truth with drama, and this feud hit close to home. There's also a story Morton once shared that shows how tough life really was for them. He said Gibson's knee wasn't even injured in the ring at first. The day before, Gibson's wife accidentally hit him with a car. His leg was already in bad shape. Still, he went out for the match. Morton told him, "Just get to the ring and go down right away. That way, you'll at least get paid." It might sound harsh, but that's how it was. No match meant no money. Gibson later had surgery with Dr. James Andrews and was out for months, but the fact that he even tried says everything about the pressure wrestlers lived under. As he gets close to 68, he's still out there doing what he loves. He runs a wrestling school, takes people on fishing trips, and sometimes even gets back in the ring with Ricky Morton. He's not stuck living in the past. He's found ways to keep wrestling in his life while also building a life outside of it. That alone shows how tough and adaptable he is. Like a lot of wrestlers from his time, Gibson went through some hard struggles. Life on the road was rough. The travel, the injuries, and the pressure pushed many wrestlers toward drugs and other escapes. Gibson's private battles aren't fully known, but it's clear he faced the same challenges as many of his peers. His story is tied to that larger truth about how costly the wrestling life could be. He also had moments where things went wrong. In 2007, while working in WWE's developmental system, he ended up caught in a clash with CM Punk that led to his firing. It was one of those backstage blow-ups that showed how wrestling is about more than just what happens in the ring. Sometimes the old-school way of thinking didn't match the new. Even for a veteran, one bad moment could change everything. And then, of course, there's Ricky Morton. The Rock and Roll Express was built on their connection. They fought, they argued, but they always came back together. Ricky has said many times that Robert is like a brother to him. That brotherhood carried them through the good and the bad. In the end, Gibson's career is about more than titles or fame. It's about lasting through the hard times, holding on to loyalty, and finding a way forward. His journey shows the heart it takes to survive in wrestling and the bond that made the Rock and Roll Express unforgettable. Ted is 71 now, and the way he used to live was just awful. We all remember the $1 Million Man scams his family pulled, plus his struggles with drugs and alcohol. But then he left all of that behind, became an ordained minister, and that's when everything started to change for him. So let's find out exactly what happened. He has never hidden the fact that his life once went down a very dark and awful road. Back in the days when he was the $1 Million Man, he looked like he had it all. Fame, money, in the spotlight every night. But behind the character, things were completely different. He has admitted that he struggled badly with alcoholism, drug use, and even infidelity. The non-stop on-the-road wrestling lifestyle might have looked glamorous from the outside, but for him it was eating away at everything that truly mattered. It nearly cost him his family, the very people he loved most. And of course, there's one chapter that still sticks in people's minds: the infamous $2 million scandal involving his family. That story alone was enough to tarnish his name for years, and it became another reminder of just how far things had fallen apart. Life was simply awful at that point, and it seemed like he was heading toward losing everything for good. But here's the thing about life: it gives you chances to change if you're willing to take them. And that's exactly what he did. After stepping away from full-time wrestling, he realized he couldn't keep going down the same path. He needed something different, something meaningful, something that would pull him out of the mess he had made. That's when he turned to Christianity. Becoming an ordained minister gave he a brand new purpose. Instead of being remembered only as the $1 Million Man, with all the scandals and bad choices attached, he started using his life as a story of redemption. He began sharing openly about his struggles and his mistakes, not to brag or make excuses, but to show people that change is possible. He started speaking at events, telling crowds about how he nearly lost it all and how faith helped him rebuild. Now he runs a Christian ministry where he continues that work. He talks about his past not with shame, but with honesty, turning all those awful chapters into lessons that can help others. For him, it's no longer about playing a character or living a flashy lifestyle. It's about showing people that no matter how bad things get, you can still turn it around. And that's the story of how he went from living in the shadow of his awful past to finding light, peace, and a brand new purpose in life. But before all the scandals, the struggles, and the drama, who was he really? Let's take a step back and look at the true wrestling star behind it all. Ted's career began in Amarillo, Texas, under the guidance of two of the most respected names in the sport, Dory Funk Jr. and Terry Funk. The Funks were known for producing tough wrestlers, and training with them meant you were going to learn wrestling the right way, inside the ring and outside of it. He didn't step straight into the spotlight, though. In June of 1974, his very first role in the business was as a referee in the Funk's Amarillo territory. That was his first real taste of the business, and it gave him the chance to learn the ropes before ever lacing up his boots. But he wasn't going to stay a referee for long. By 1975, he moved into Bill Watts' Mid-South territory, where he was promoted as the son of wrestler Iron Mike He, keeping alive the legacy of his stepfather who had passed away in the ring years earlier. This gave Ted a strong backstory that connected him to fans right away. His first official match wasn't a win, though. He lost to the legendary Danny Hodge. For most wrestlers, losing their debut could have been discouraging, but Ted kept grinding. He stayed in Mid-South for about 4 years, sharpening his skills, learning from veterans, and building his reputation as a wrestler to watch. By February 1978, his hard work paid off when he defeated Dick Slater to become the Missouri State Champion. That was a huge deal at the time, because Missouri was one of the NWA's most respected territories, and the title had been held by some of the biggest names in wrestling. Unfortunately, his reign didn't last long. He lost the belt to Dick Murdoch just a few weeks later. Still, that run put him on the map and showed fans and promoters alike that he had star potential. In 1979, he made his first move to the big stage of Vince McMahon Sr.'s Worldwide Wrestling Federation, which shortly after became known as the WWF. On February 13th of that year, the WWF created a brand new title, the North American Heavyweight Championship, and he was chosen to be its very first champion. That was a major honor, and it showed how much faith the company had in him. Unfortunately, just a few months later in June, he dropped the title to Pat Patterson. Even so, Ted had etched his name into the history books as the inaugural champion of that belt. Not long after, he found himself in another huge moment. He was the very first opponent for Hulk Hogan in Madison Square Garden. At the time, Hogan wasn't yet the megastar he would become. But looking back, it's wild to think he played such a big part in that early chapter of Hogan's career. After that, he moved around to different territories, including Georgia Championship Wrestling, where he started to gain even more attention. One storyline in Georgia became the stuff of legend. In an angle that looked so real it made fans cry, he took not one, not two, but 4 pile drivers from the fabulous Freebirds, 1 on the concrete floor and 3 more in the ring. His tag partner, Tommy Wildfire Rich, had to throw in the towel because the beating looked so brutal. Fans in the WTBS studio were convinced Ted had been seriously injured, and their reaction made the angle unforgettable. Through the early and mid-1980s, his career took him to almost every major territory. In Mid-South, he had memorable feuds with stars like Ric Flair, Paul Orndorff, Dick Murdoch, and the Freebirds. One of his most famous heel turns came when he betrayed the Junkyard Dog, instantly making himself one of the most hated men in the region. He then formed a villainous group called the Rat Pack with Jim Dugan and Matt Bourne, dominating the territory for months. Eventually, his partnership with Duggan broke down, leading to a heated rivalry that ended in a loser leaves town match, which Ted lost. At the same time, he became known for a sneaky little trick that became his trademark. He carried a black glove in his tights, which he would secretly load up and use to knock out opponents while the referee wasn't looking. It was classic villain behavior, and fans hated him for it. But it worked perfectly to build his reputation as a ruthless heel. Ted's career wasn't just about the US territories, though. He also became a regular in Japan, working for All Japan Pro Wrestling. In October 1983, he won the NWA United National Championship by defeating Jerry Lawler in a tournament final. Sadly, just a few months later, he lost the belt to Michael Hayes. That same year, Ted's mother, Helen Hild, passed away, which hit him hard personally. In 1985, Ted teamed up with another American star, Stan Hansen, in Japan. The two became one of the most feared foreign tag teams in all Japan. Together, they won the PWF Tag Team Championship and even captured the famous World's Strongest Tag Team League in 1985, finishing first place. For 2 years, he and Hansen dominated the tag scene, proving that Ted wasn't just a singles star, he could shine in tag team wrestling too. By 1987, everything was about to change. Jim Crockett Promotions had bought out the UWF, and he was in talks with the National Wrestling Alliance. But then came an offer from Vince McMahon's WWF that he couldn't turn down. He didn't even know what character he was going to play, only that it would be a major push. Pat Patterson told him that if Vince McMahon himself ever became a wrestler, the gimmick he'd choose would be the one Ted was about to get. That gimmick, of course, was the $1 Million Man. Before making that jump, though, he closed out one more run in Japan with Hansen. They lost their tag belts to Jumbo Tsuruta and Tiger Mask in July 1987, regained them briefly, but were forced to vacate the titles once Ted officially left for WWF. Years later, in 1993, Ted made one last return to Japan. He reunited with Stan Hansen, and the two quickly won the World Tag Team Championship by defeating the team of Kawada and Taue, known as the Holy Demon Army. Unfortunately, injuries caught up with him soon after. A neck and back problem forced him out of the World's Strongest Tag League that year, and Giant Baba himself had to step in to replace him. That would effectively mark the end of Ted's in-ring career in Japan. Then he made his big return to the WWF on May 15, 1987, at a house show in Houston, Texas. But he didn't immediately jump into matches. He first walked to the ring just to announce that he finally belonged in the WWF. Of course, trouble followed him almost instantly. The one-man gang and his manager Slick came out for a scheduled match, and he had to be physically held back from jumping in. A few weeks later, at another house show, he had his first match, a loss to the one-man gang. He went on to lose 2 more times to Gang at house shows, but something was brewing. On June 26th, he teamed up with Sam Houston against the one-man gang and Ron Bass. Towards the end of the match, he suddenly turned on Houston after a missed dropkick, leaving him to be double-teamed and pinned. That was the moment he fully turned heel and set the stage for one of wrestling's most memorable characters. The very next day on WWF Superstars, he debuted his new persona, the $1 Million Man. Instantly, he was someone you loved to hate. Dressed in a flashy, gold-studded suit, covered with dollar signs and eventually carrying his own diamond-encrusted $1 Million Championship belt, he was the embodiment of greed and arrogance. He bragged about his multiple homes across the U.S. and the Caribbean and brought his loyal bodyguard Virgil along for every appearance. Virgil did everything from watching his back in matches to performing humiliating tasks for like rubbing his feet, all to drive home the point that his catchphrase was true: everybody has a price. The gimmick was genius. He would show off his wealth by bribing people in ridiculous skits, paying off hotel clerks, waiters, or even random fans to humiliate themselves for cash. Sometimes he'd hand a $100 bill to a kid to complete a challenge and then snatch it away at the last second, leaving them empty-handed. In reality, he always paid off camera, but it didn't matter. The character made fans hate him in a fun, over-the-top way. His finishing move, the $1 Million Dream, a Cobra Clutch, often ended matches with him stuffing a $100 bill into his defeated opponent's mouth, which Virgil would quietly retrieve afterward. His first huge storyline in WWF came when he tried to buy the WWF World Heavyweight Championship from Hulk Hogan. Hogan refused, saying he would have to beat him in the ring. Frustrated, he approached Andre the Giant and convinced him to win the title on his behalf in a live episode of The Main Event. Andre did just that, pinning Hogan in a controversial finish where the referee was actually Andre's twin brother. He claimed the championship, but WWF President Jack Tunney later declared the title vacant because it wasn't won the proper way. At WrestleMania 4, a tournament was held to crown the new WWF champion. He made it to the finals after defeating Hacksaw Jim Duggan and Don Morocco, with a little help from Andre behind the scenes to keep Hulk Hogan from advancing. In the finals, though, he ran into Macho Man Randy Savage. Despite all his tricks, Savage, with Hogan interfering to neutralize his schemes, defeated him. But even in loss, he proved he could dominate storylines, and his feud with Savage over the WWF Championship continued that summer. One of the highlights was SummerSlam, where he and Andre the Giant took on Hogan and Savage in a tag team main event, a showcase of wrestling's biggest names clashing with egos, strength, and gold on the line. He continued to push his million-dollar man persona by buying wrestlers' contracts and making them his slaves in storylines, like Hercules. He bought the number 30 entry spot in the 1989 Royal Rumble from Akeem, trying to cheat his way to victory, but was ultimately eliminated by Big John Studd. These antics, paired with constant scheming, kept him near the top of the card. He also introduced his own championship, the $1 Million Championship, because even all his wealth couldn't buy him the WWF World Heavyweight title from Hogan or Savage. His storylines blended clever villainy with real in-ring skill. He feuded with Jake the Snake Roberts, putting Roberts out of action for a few months, then defeated Jimmy Superfly Snuka at SummerSlam by countout. He also tangled with Hulk Hogan again, with the giant Zeus in his corner, but his schemes backfired and Hogan emerged victorious. He even created the $1 Million Team for Survivor Series, only to be eliminated by Hogan in the end, showing that even the richest and most cunning heel couldn't always win. In 1990, he faced more challenges. He was forced to enter the Royal Rumble as entrant number 1, breaking the record by lasting 45 minutes. His feud with Jake Roberts over the stolen $1 Million belt led to a WrestleMania 6 match, while his battles with Big Bossman and Dusty Rhodes brought more high-stakes drama to WWF programming. During Survivor Series, he introduced a mystery partner who turned out to be a debuting Undertaker, an early moment in the career of one of wrestling's greatest icons. By 1992, he shifted gears, forming the tag team Money Inc. With IRS, managed by Jimmy Hart, they dominated the tag division, winning the WWF Tag Team Championship 3 times and feuding with the likes of the Natural Disasters, the Steiner Brothers, and the Nasty Boys. His in-ring career slowed in 1993 after an injury, and he quietly retired from active wrestling to focus on other roles, though he returned to management and commentary in later years. Then he returned as the mastermind behind the $1 Million Corporation, buying up wrestlers' contracts and controlling a stable that included names like Bam Bam Bigelow, 1-2-3 Kid, and Psycho Sid. Even The Undertaker was briefly brought back under his control, though it turned out to be an imposter. He also helped introduce the Ringmaster, who would become Stone Cold Steve Austin, giving another superstar his start. His last in-ring involvement during this era was in 1996 before moving on to WCW, where he played a short-lived role in the NWO before retiring from full-time managing and wrestling. He returned to WWE multiple times in the 2000s, working as a creative consultant, appearing at legend ceremonies, and even stepping back in the ring for special appearances, like the Raw 15th Anniversary Battle Royal, where he proved once again that in the world of everyone truly does have a price. Over the years, he also helped his son, He Jr., get started in WWE, appeared in storylines on NXT with Cameron Grimes and LA Knight, and even bought the 24/7 Championship in 2019, nearly 26 years after his last title win. And that's a wrap for today's video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time. Bye.